I'm not really sure where to begin this review for Secret Invasion. I guess I will start by saying that this is going to include spoilers. I think I thought about it long and hard, and I don't know if I could talk about this show without going into detail of the major plot points. So this is just a spoiler warning. If you haven't seen Secret Invasion, or at least like the end of it, then don't watch this review because I am going to go into some of the more finer details of the show. Now, it's no secret that I'm a huge Marvel fanboy. You can see the poster that's been behind me for almost all of my videos. I have the seal of the Vishanti from Doctor Strange tattooed on my body. I have been and always will be a huge Marvel fan. These movies have been a huge part of me growing up, and so I'm always going to continue to support Marvel. But myself, much like most people who watch the Marvel movies and now TV shows, ever since Endgame, a lot of the projects that have come after that have been pretty underwhelming, except for a few projects here and a few projects here and there. Especially the TV shows, I felt like a lot of them have been lacking something. Again, there have been a few good ones, but for the most part, I felt like the TV shows have maybe not been as successful or as resonant as Marvel would have hoped. And when it comes to Secret Invasion, I have a lot of thoughts, and they are mixed, to say the least. My thoughts are kind of all over the place, as I was saying earlier, so I'm just going to kind of start by just talking about the show in general. I did like the acting and the casting. Samuel L. Jackson has been pretty consistently good as Nick Fury ever since the first Iron Man movie, so it was nice to see him kind of be in the main role, and I thought he did perfectly fine. You know, it's nothing that we haven't seen before from him, so he's solid in the show. Olivia Colman is one of the standouts of the show, I would say, actually. Like, her character is really likable, and anytime she's on the screen, I felt like I just really enjoyed what she was doing. So she was great. Emilia Clarke, who I didn't expect to have as big of a role in this show, I thought she was good, and I think she could have an interesting future in the MCU going forward. And then Kingsley Ben-Adir, I think is his name, who played Gravik, the main villain. He was, for the most part, a good villain. I feel like he had good screen presence. I do feel like some of the writing let him down. Some of his lines were not, I wouldn't have maybe written them that way, but his delivery was pretty good. Although I will say, I just watched the Barbie movie. You may have seen my review on this channel, and he was in that movie as one of the Kens. And so, having watched Barbie and seeing him in that role, to then having to go and watch the finale of Secret Invasion, it was kind of hard to take him seriously because of how different those two roles were. But I am starting to see him pop up in a few more projects, and so I think overall, even though there were some things about his character that could have been executed better, I'm excited to see him in more projects. So all of that is to say, I did enjoy the casting and the acting in this show. I also thought, and this is something that the Marvel movies and shows as of late have not done well, that the visual effects were actually pretty clean, except for the last main CGI big battle at the end, which is, again, a problem that Marvel often has. They just resort to a big blowout CGI spectacle at the end, and this show had that, and that's where it started to look a little bit more Marvel-y, but I thought for the most part this was a pretty good looking show. It kind of looked typical Marvel, but I can't really put my finger on it. There was just something that was a little bit different that just made it stand out a little bit. So from a visual effects standpoint, I thought this was a pretty good looking show. But if we're just talking about this show's story and what this show means for the MCU going forward, it left me wanting a lot more. So obviously the whole plot of the show is there are Skrulls that have been on the Earth for a long time. Most of them are good. They've just been living secretly, kind of doing their own thing, but also trying to find a new planet to live on, or hoping that Nick Fury could find them a planet to live on. Whereas there's a select group of Skrulls who have kind of grown sick and tired of waiting for that to happen, and they're just like, we're gonna take over the Earth, we're gonna cause the humans to nuclear proliferate one another, and then it'll just be the Skrulls left. And so, but with it being secret invasion, right? Most of the world has no idea this is going on. And so that is a very interesting concept. However, and this is where my spoilers come into play. So again, if you have not watched the show, please click off this video. So there's this secret war that's happening that no one is aware of, which is then solved by the end of the show. The problem is, for the most part, solved. The only lingering effect is that the president basically says any life forms that are not born on Earth are hostiles, which, again, you didn't necessarily need this whole show to have gotten him to that point. That is something that you could have just had him do, based on the events of Endgame or any of the other alien, extraterrestrial, non-Earth life forms that have appeared in the MCU. It didn't feel like you needed this whole show just to get to that point, because that's basically what it is. If no one knows that this secret invasion, this secret battle is going on, then if it's solved by the end of the show and still no one knows about it except for the small group of individuals involved, then this show really was nothing. It for me, it didn't really justify its own existence. The point that they were trying to get to was not necessary to have this show for, if that makes sense. I'm trying to put it in the best terms, but it's kind of felt like Obi-Wan, like the Obi-Wan show for me. It's an okay show. It was enjoyable to watch for the most part, but you're just left with wondering, by the end, what was the point? Why this doesn't have really an impact going forward that was necessary to create the whole show, if that makes sense. But the one thing that really upset me with this show, and this was a theory that people had from the start of the show that was confirmed, was that Rhodey has been a Skrull. It is still undetermined how long he's been a Skrull, but if what they're implying in the show is correct, that he has been a Skrull potentially since the events of Civil War, and he missed all of the subsequent films, he missed Infinity War and Endgame, then I'm going to be super, super upset, because you can't tell me that Rhodey was the first person to see Tony after he snapped and sacrificed himself in Endgame. You can't tell me that Don Cheadle's acting and his reaction to that, you can't tell me that that was a Skrull. That just is so inappropriate. That would just really piss me off, if I'm being totally honest. To have that be the case, it just makes no sense to me. From a storytelling standpoint. And I get that it does add some compelling motivations for Rhodey in the show that he's going to be getting soon, him now trying to catch up on all the events post-Civil War. He might not even know that Tony is dead, and him having to cope with that. That could be a very interesting story, I do admit that, but just undoing all of those emotional moments from that movie, I just think is a real, that's a mistake. I think that is a huge mistake. So again, Rhodey being a Skrull, I have no problem with, but the extent of time that he's been a Skrull, that could potentially cause some big issues for me going forward. If I could just sum up my thoughts, I guess I would say I did enjoy watching Secret Invasion every single week. For the most part, it was an enjoyable show. I just felt like it didn't build to anything, and I think its place in the MCU, it didn't leave anything super significant behind. Of course, there are some storylines that are going to come from this. Like I said, Rhodey being a Skrull, the president declaring all non-Earth-born beings as basically combatants. Nick Fury going back up to Saber with his Skrull wife, obviously leading into the next Captain Marvel movie. There's stuff that it's leading to, but as a whole, I don't feel like this show really built to anything. I was talking to my friend the other day. This felt like I use the term a nothing show. This show felt like a nothing show. You watched it, and then it ended, and you're like, okay, I enjoyed it, but what's the point going forward? That's kind of how I felt about Secret Invasion. Okay, so Secret Invasion, have you seen it? If so, let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. Thank you so much for watching, and be sure to stay tuned for more.